Now we're going to look at variables and how we create them and how we can work with them in Java, and indeed what a variable is. So for each new lecture here, I'm going to create a new Hello World template. So just by tapping try there and then get rid of my previous one, and I'm going to save it straight away so that it's clear what we're working on. I'll call this variables. There we go. So you can see that it's already saving all of our programs that we've made. And then really all we're going to change for most of the next few lectures is the code inside the main method. So if you've worked with different languages before, you may be used to defining a variable with something like the var command, like you do in JavaScript, for example. But in Java, it works differently. Java is a strong typed language, which means that every variable that you create has to be of a certain type. And once that variable has been created, you can't change its type. So let's start with a fairly basic type, an integer. So int is short for integer, which is a whole number. So if I wanted to create an integer, I just type int and then the name of the variable. So I might call it age, for example, and then the initial value of that variable. So for example, 34, and then semicolon at the end of the line. So this creates an integer or a whole number which has the name of an age and the value 34. And from there, just in case you're slightly unclear on what a variable is, it should be fairly straightforward. A variable is something like this that we can change the value of. So this might just keep track of the age of our current user, for example. And that's all a variable is. We did use them a couple of times in the previous section when we created, for example, the edit text to refer to the text field that we wanted to get the value of. So we have used variables already. So here's a quick challenge for you straight away. Can you create an integer called favorite number, set it to your favorite number, and then output it to the console? Very simple. Good luck. All right, I hope you managed that. You should have just used int to create your integer and then favorite number. You may or may not have spelled favorite like that. I won't take marks off if you didn't put your U in, but favorite number with a small f and a capital N would be generally we would describe the variable, because we usually use a small first letter and then a capital letter for every word after that. That just makes it nice and easy to read. So favorite number, my favorite number is 7. I won't again take marks off if you chose a number other than 7, although of course you are wrong. And then we just want to display it in the log, so we use the same command that we saw in the previous video, system.out.println, and then we just pop it straight in, favorite number. There we go. So let's start that, and there it is. So that's our first example of creating a variable and displaying it. Now what if our favorite number happened to be 7.5? No reason your favorite number can't be a decimal. Let's try running that and see what happens. Aha, we've got an error. Possible loss of precision. So what's going on there? Well, it's fairly straightforward, I think. We've created our favorite number as an integer, which means a whole number, and then we've set it to 7.5, which is not a whole number. So we need to change the variable type to one that can accept a non-whole number. And the one that I normally use is a double, so named because it takes up double the memory of a standard floating point number, and a floating point number is just a decimal. So a number that can be either a whole number or a decimal. So when you want to use decimals, I'd recommend using double like that. And then let's just take a look. Now that displays 7.5, no problem at all. So those are the two numeric variable types that you'll probably want to use, either int if you want something to be an integer, so number of users, for example, age, that kind of thing, and double if you think that your number might end up being a decimal, so something like a price or temperature. Before we go on to look at other variable types, I just want to quickly turn your attention to a great website, learnjavaonline.org. You'll probably end up here if you do some Googling and you want to find out a bit more information about something. But this particular page shows us what are known as the primitives in Java. So they are a set of, you could say, basic variable types from which other variable types are built. So you can see the ones that we've looked at already are int and double. The others, just to make you aware of them, we don't really use very much, but we have a few other integer types, so that we've got byte, short, which are much smaller. They only take up 1 byte or 2 bytes. And there's our integer, which takes up 4 bytes, and then long, which takes up 8 bytes. So the number of bytes here refers to how big the number can get without causing an error in the program. So if, for example, I want to check how big an int can be, I would Google something like int maximum size or maximum value, let's say, in Java. Something like that. And I like the look of that third result there. So in fact, we've got the values for all of them there. So the basic byte can be between -128 and 127, which is probably a bit small for most cases. A short integer goes from -32,000 to 32,000, which again is probably going to be okay in most cases, but if your number of users gets higher and higher, then you might well exceed that. Whereas for int, it goes down to -2 to the 31, which is about -2 billion and up to about 2 billion. So that's probably going to be big enough for most values that you're dealing with in your programs. But if it's not, you can use a long, which goes up to an even higher number. So that's the difference between those types. And then we've got 2 decimal numbers, so float and double. I'd recommend generally going for double. And then we've got char, which is just a character, so any A, B, C, D, etc. And then boolean, which is the next one that we're going to look at here, which is just true or false. So these are the primitive types, and all other types are made up from those. So let's jump back and have a look at our boolean. And I'm just going to get rid of that code there. So to create a boolean, we just type boolean like that, and then we might have something like am I male? And for me, that would be true. If you're interested, the word boolean is named after George Boole. There he is, an English mathematician who did a lot of work in logic, and so true or false is obviously fairly central to that, and that's where the word boolean comes from. So in your programs, you could use a boolean for is logged in, or is active user, or something like that, or indeed alive or dead for our ghosts example from the previous video. So very quick challenge once again. Create a boolean for something that you could imagine actually using a boolean for in a program, and then display it in the logs. Go for it. All right, nice and easy. So just type boolean, and then I'm going to call it user likes pizza, and we'll set that to be true. It is true for this particular user, and then we'll just pop it in the console. So system, and then output methods, and print line user likes pizza, semicolon, and start, and we should get true. There we go. So that's how we use booleans. So far we've got booleans and numbers. The final variable type that we're going to look at is strings, which we've already seen before up here. So a string is just a combination of characters, really. It's a very common variable type, but it's not a primitive because it's made up of chars, characters. So because it's not a primitive, instead of using a lowercase definition, so before we used, notice, lowercase b, and we've used lowercases for all our definitions so far, we use a capital letter because it's not a primitive. It's actually a class. And classes are generally defined with capital letters at the start. So just like hello world there. So string, my name, for example, is Rob. Of course, I think we've seen before that we don't type it like that. We need to put quotes around a string whenever we use it. So my name is Rob. And then let's print that to the console. But this time we'll do something slightly different. Dot out dot println, and then we could use my name is in quotes. Then I want to put a space at the end of that, and then we use a plus to concatenate our strings. That means put them together basically. So my name is, and then we have my name, and we might want to put a full stop on the end as well. There we go. So let's just run that. There we go. My name is Rob. Fantastic. So another quick challenge for you. I want you to save your name and your age as variables and then output them to the console saying my name is whatever your name is and I am your number of years old. Good luck. All right, hope you managed that. So let's create a string. Again, we'll just call it my name, Rob, same as before. And then we'll create an integer called age, which is 34. And then we'll just output that to the console. So system.out.println. My name is my name, and I am, remember to put all those spaces in, age, years old. Close the brackets, semicolon. All right, let's take a look. Just ran that, fantastic. My name is Rob and I am 34 years old. Something that some of you may have picked up on is that this age is not a string. It's an integer, and yet the system has allowed us to bring it into this string without any problems. That works because it's a primitive. So primitive variables can be put into strings like this without having to convert them to strings, whereas other variable types generally will need a conversion to a string before you can display it or bring it into a string like we have done there. Okay, so now we're familiar with the main variable types that we're going to be using, so integers, doubles, strings, and booleans. Let's just see a few things that we can do with them rather than just set their value and display them in the console. So let's work with numbers first of all. Let's get rid of this and create a double. And I'm just going to call it A for the moment. And we'll set it to 6.7. And then we'll have another double, B, which will be 3.2. So I can do all sorts of manipulation with these numbers really straightforwardly. So let's put it straight in the console. So system.out.println. And then let's say we want to multiply those two together. We use the asterisk, so that's Shift 8 for me. So A star B means A times B, and that will give us whatever 6.7 times 3.2 is. There we go. We can add them together, of course. Similarly, so 9.9, and we could subtract, I don't know, 7.3 from that as well. That will work that out for us. Now here we get an interesting result. It's not quite 2.6, it's 2.6, loads of zeros, and then a 5. Now this is because a double is not a completely accurate variable type. I'm not going to go into precisely why, but essentially this is a binary, so a set of zeros and ones, which is an approximation of the decimal number. Now the reason that is essentially because it's much faster for the computers to work with. So if you round it to 1 or 2 decimal places to display to the user, then it's always going to be accurate enough for you. But you should be aware that if you're working with doubles and then you display them to the user at some point, or you use them in some way, you should bear in mind that you should round them to the number of decimal places that you need. So that's working with numbers. There are, of course, a bunch of things you can do with strings as well. I'm just going to show you one for now, but we'll see a lot more throughout the course. And the one I'm going to show you is how to get the length of a string, so the number of characters in a string. So let's create a string, which I'll just call myString, with a bunch of random characters in it. There we go. So if I wanted to get the length of that string, then I would put it in the console, so print line. I would use myString dot length. And then I would use a pair of parentheses. That's because length here is a method. And whenever we call a method, we will instruct it to do something. We have a pair of parentheses, which sometimes will contain a variable that we want to pass to that particular method. But in this case, we don't want to do that. We just want myString.length, and that will tell us the length of myString. Let's just check. There we go. So 16 characters in myString. All right, so that's how you create and manipulate variables in Java. Of course, we need a final challenge to put all of that together. So fairly straightforwardly, I want you to create 2 strings, which will be equal to your first name and your last name. And then I want you to create an integer, which sums the number of characters in your first name and your second name. And then a line that displays in the console the number of characters in my full name is, and then that final value. Should be fairly straightforward with any luck. Go for it. All right, I hope you managed it. So in my case, I just want to have string, and I'll call it first name is equal to Rob. And then we'll have another string, second name is equal to Percival. And then we'll create an integer, which I'll call length. And that's going to be equal to first name dot length plus second name dot length, because we want to add those 2 together. And then finally, we want to output the result. So system.out.println the number of characters in my full name is, and then we'll concatenate that with the variable length. There we go. That should do it. Let's take a look. Fantastic. Characters in my full name is 11. Brilliant. I hope you managed that. In the next video, we'll go on to another important variable type, which is the type of array. See you there.